Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from samgerrans.com. Today is Monday, March 27th, 2023. And today the topic is the machine and technique. Now, I do a variety of presentations, some of them shorter, some of them longer. This is a long form presentation. Quite a lot of it's going to be on YouTube for free. The rest of it, or all of it in fact, will be on my Substack for paid subscribers. But even for those who are not paid subscribers, I want to cover the main areas of this just here. Now, firstly, what is technique and why is it important? Well, I came across this subject through the works of Jacques Ellul. This book, The Technological Society, not sure if it's focusing or not. Get a copy and read it. I mean, it's slow reading, and he has another book called Propaganda. I would highly recommend reading both of these books if you want to understand where we are now. He was a social scientist, a social philosopher, political scientist, and a very intelligent man. Back in the days when Western universities were able to countenance people with intelligence and the ability to think. Obviously, those days are all well behind us. Excuse me. And the reason why I'm interested in this is as somebody who happens to live in Russia and have a Russian background. I speak Russian and I have a degree in Russian. I've lived here for over 20 years. Although I am very firmly on the side of Russia when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, I understand the history, I understand why Russia's been forced into this. I've been concerned to see, or concerned, perhaps that's not quite the right word. I've been interested, bemused to see a lot of people who over many years understood or demonstrated that they understood the evils of the world and so on, in terms of the New World Order, in terms of, as it were, the World Economic Forum and the Klaus Schwabs and the Bill Gates and all of this, and they get it. It's wonderful. They understand 9/11. They understand whatever it is, the rollout of the COVID obedience training program. Now that there is clearly a conflict, or a marked conflict, between the New World Order, if you want to call it that, the rules-based order, which is basically America telling everyone what to do and then bombing them if they don't like it, and the fair world order. They've just sort of, in my view, rather unquestioningly, just sort of jumped over onto the fair world order bandwagon, assuming that the enemy of your enemy is your friend. Well, is that true? Possibly not. I'm not here to say that. I'm not really here to talk about what Russia is and isn't doing. I kind of look at things from a superior perspective than that, at least in terms of what Ellul talks about. And it's really his ideas that I'm here to add to, or to present. Now, people don't read anymore. I just know this. So that's why I've decided mainly to talk rather than to write, because people won't read. So that's just how it is. So first of all, what is technique and why is it important? Well, what is technique? Well, what technique isn't is a one-to-one correlation with technology, although technology is a manifestation of technique, and we'll get into this. But so what is technique itself? Well, technique itself is really the embracing of a rational, pragmatic, outcome-based, well, outcome in the sense that only a rational outcome is desirable, philosophy. And it basically divests itself, whatever culture you come from, it divests itself of any attachment to tradition, to history, to race, to collective memory, to absolutely everything that our forefathers thought was the only thing, in fact, worth living for. It flushes all of that down the lavatory and concentrates only on how to get more, quicker and faster and more efficiently. That's basically it, without asking any of the big questions, i.e., why are we doing this? Now, I happen to see, I don't watch much Russian television. I don't watch any television. In fact, I don't have a television. But I happen to see on YouTube, there's a Russian chap called Solovyov. And Solovyov is very popular here. And he does a lot of things. But one of the things he does is he has a show where he'll ask people on. And they have very heated political debates. It's not like the UK where nothing really gets said. All kinds of things get said here. In fact, things perhaps you shouldn't be said are said here. The most explosive proponent of this style was obviously Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who, God rest his soul, unfortunately died very recently. He was absolutely made for this time. If you know who he is, you'll understand what I mean there. But I remember this one show, and there was an American who spoke passable Russian. It wasn't great, but it was enough to get by. And he was being, very briefly, a conversation in Russian is different to a conversation in English, in the sense that, I mean, obviously I'm generalizing here, but a conversation in English is something like a game of tennis. There's one ball, two players, and you're lobbing the ball over the net. A conversation in Russian is much more like a game of rugby. There's one ball, 22 whatever it is players, and they all want that ball. It's more like Italian, everyone's kind of shouting and talking over each other. Well, it was like this, and in the course of this conversation they were attacking this, I'm not sure if Zhirinovsky was there, I can't remember, but they were attacking this American chap, and basically, I don't know what his position was, and saying, well, you're evil and everything, meaning, what the Americans are doing, the United States are doing. And his position was very interesting. He said, well, we do this excuse me, because we can. And if you could, you would do it too. And I have to say, I go along with that. I think he was right. I think his presentation was not philosophically incorrect. And perhaps the reasons for this position will become clear in the rest of this presentation. Now, on the Russian side, am I against Russia? No, I'm not against Russia at all. I love Russia in a lot of ways. I love the language, certainly. And on the good side, compared to the West, it's true that Russia is a lot freer in many ways. You can still have interesting conversations here more freely. It's not that almost predetermined verbal floral dance that you get in the UK, where you just get the fluoride stare and all of that. So it is still possible to have meaningful conversations here. It's not as possible as it was, say, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When I first came to Russia, it was impossible to get away from meaningful conversations. Everybody wanted to talk philosophy. It got really tedious. In a very short period of time, Russia has turned from intellectually a Wild West to a far more manicured environment as technique has taken over. And this country has gone from what was essentially a post-war environment, I guess you would call it that. It was sort of been held in stasis by people like Brezhnev. After Yeltsin, the catastrophic Yeltsin years, most Russians, I'm not speaking for all Russians, I can't speak for all Russians, but a lot of Russians, although they're trapped in their mortgages and they've got credit for their car and they're into showing off how much they've got and all of that. So it's just a very tedious sort of reenactment of what I grew up around in the West. But even so, it's still possible to have some real conversations. And politically, you can get away with saying a whole lot more here than you can in the West. So that's true. It's also true that Russia is a more traditional conservative country than the West in some ways. But as I've said before, it's just the same thing. It's just further back down the conveyor belt. So it's more like it would have been in the UK, say, in about 1940 or 1950. But it's catching up and catching up quickly, if you want to use catching up in that way. It's also introducing some good legislation to protect the society against the evil effects of what America promotes around the world in terms of all of its delusions and its its depravities. However, as I say, Russia's on the same conveyor belt. And that conveyor belt, as I'm part of my presentation really presupposes, is a function of technique. And, as we get into technique, or if you look at some of my other videos on it, you'll see that basically all countries any country which does not embrace technique will be destroyed by those countries which do embrace technique. And those countries which do embrace technique will eventually be destroyed by technique itself. This is the pact with the devil. There's no way out of this. I'm not here, and I see people in the comments on my YouTube, for example, say, "Oh, well, so you're saying there's no way out of this, and yo, bro, there should be a way out of this. Just, I'll just download the Freedom app and like enough videos, and eventually everything will change for the better." No, my friend, that's not how it works. No, we are absolutely done. In my view, we're absolutely done. If you want to know why, or the only thing I think that you can do about it, then you can read my work on that, The God Protocol, which if you go to samgerrans.com/books, you'll find it there, and you'll get a link and you can download it for free. That's my solution. That's the only solution that I know of. There is no other. There's no way out of this. You're not going to be able to yo bro your way out of this. It's just not going to happen. Okay. So that's that bit. So we're on the same conveyor belt here. Absolutely. We also have what you might call a fifth column. This, if you want to use that term, that's a column that's a kind of term that's used here. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean people who perhaps fifth column is a little bit too dark a way of putting it, but certainly there are many people here in positions of power, running banks and large industries and media conglomerations and all of that, who were trained in the West. They went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they went to Princeton, and they're highly indoctrinated. But not only are they highly indoctrinated, culturally they don't really belong here. So sure, they've got Russian surnames and they speak Russian, but in their mentality, they're really westernized in the sense that they see things in terms of technique. They don't care about their own people. They don't care about anything except more for them. It's a very simple calculus, and you have to admit, if people are not in any ways hampered by questions of the meaning of life, then more is good, less is bad. I've met many people like this, Russians and non-Russians, and it's in a way you can sort of envy them. It must be so great if that's all you think about. Money is just a way of keeping score, and more is better, and damn the consequences. And there are many people here who think like this, and they are culturally and educationally aligned with their people who are exactly the same in all the other countries. As I've said in other talks, I think it's a mistake to see the world in sort of vertical terms. This country versus that country. It's a narrow, it's a short-sighted way of looking at things. Really what we're dealing with is caste system, which is horizontal. And so we have that here. We have delusion and libtardism. All of this is growing apace here. You don't have to go very far to see the green-haired delusionals wearing their Dr. Martin boots and hairy legs and all the rest of it. That's all here. It's not as pronounced and as diseased as it is in the West, but we have the same disease here, and it's just not at such a catastrophic stage yet. We have mass surveillance here. The city I live in is called a smart city. You're pretty much surveilled no matter where you go in this city. And so Russia is applying and dedicated to technique. These are all manifestations of technique. And if Russia were not to do these things, it would not survive. But what I'm trying to say is it's as bound, it's as committed to technique as everywhere else. So, Ilul poses four great presuppositions, basically for the dogma, the catechism for technique. And these It doesn't sound very interesting, but they're really the result of the so-called Enlightenment, when we threw God under the bus and then declared that he didn't exist. And you need that as a prerequisite for technique. And these are, firstly, and I'm just going to go through them quickly because I've talked about them in more depth in other videos, that man's aim in life is happiness. Everywhere believes this. Doesn't matter where you go. Even in the American Constitution, it's the pursuit of happiness. Happiness. Well, okay, I'm not saying it's wrong to be happy, but happiness as the purpose of life. This is. Well, we'll get into it in a minute. That man is naturally good. This is woven into the waft and web of humanism. Again, this is a godless philosophy. That history develops in endless progress, and everything is matter, i.e., there's a mechanical, physical machine code at the bottom of everything, including human consciousness. Now, these four things are believed by absolutely every single society which embraces technique. It has to believe them. The countries or the societies or the tribes or the peoples that don't believe these things are crushed by technique. And the idea is that you can keep some of them. You can keep some of the things which are good. You can keep tradition. You can keep your history. You can keep certain things, but still embrace technique. And this is not true. And the reason is because it defies the laws of technique. Technique requires that you only care about utility and efficiency and productivity and speed, quantity, essentially. And if you only embrace those half-heartedly, you will be crushed by those who have no qualms about forgetting about all of their culture and all of their history. So, just to cover that point again, happiness, that man, that's the aim of life, that man is naturally good, that history develops in endless progress, and everything is matter. These are not only lies, they are actually not correct. They're also antithetical to how anyone that I can think of, but certainly the major traditions have thought about things. So, I mean, just to take progress, for example, under the so-called Judeo-Christian model. I don't like that term, but since people use it, I'll just use it. There was a fall. Man was essentially, he's collapsed down from a higher state. If you take the Vedic presentations, we are now in the Kali Yuga, which is the dark age. We're in the lowest age that has ever existed. Obviously, there are cycles within cycles, but essentially we are collapsing downwards, you see. It's an involution of everything. And we see this borne out, excuse me, with the loss of quality. The quality. We're not allowed even to talk about quality anymore. It's everyone's supposed to be equal. This would have been anathema to anybody, even 300-400 years ago, even 200 years ago. We understood that there were exceptional, average, and mediocre and bad men. We understood this. We understood that there was a natural system, a natural caste system in which there were superior, inferior men. You're not allowed to talk about that anymore, except in certain circumstances. For example, sports. Nobody would be so stupid as to say, for example, that I would be able to last more than 5 seconds in the ring with Mike Tyson, in his prime, or even now. Why? Because he's a superior boxer, or whatever it is. So in certain areas you can still talk about it, but in terms of intrinsic qualities, no, you're not allowed to talk about this. Anyway, I'm not here to argue that these things are so or not so. I'm just saying that these are things which we now accept as axiomatic and everywhere does. And you end up living in this kind of schizophrenia, but that's something which technique requires. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all that. What I'm trying to say is this is one ideology, and all countries believe this. And Russia and China believe it too. And just as an anecdote, my son, he's 24 now, but when he went to a Russian school, and one day he came back from school and said to me, he said, Daddy, all the boys in school all wear crosses, krestiki in Russian. can I wear one? I sort of thought about it, and I said, well, only if you learn something about the Christian religion, firstly. Because as a lot of people say, well, Russia's this orthodox country where everybody believes in God, and it's a very, very, very a believing country. And if you ask any Russian and say, are you like pravoslavny? Are you an Orthodox believer? I say yes. They'll all say it. They'll absolutely all say it. So this was about, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 years ago, whatever it was. It was about 7 or 8, I can't remember. So I take a bit of a dim view on some of the Christian ideologies, but nevertheless, my opinion is that each man should come to his own view on this. So I said, well, if you read the New Testament and you memorize the Lord's Prayer, then you can. That's the deal. So he read the New Testament and he memorized the Lord's Prayer, which is called Otche Nash in Russian. Otche Nash, our Father, that's what it means. And I can't remember, I don't think he ever did wear one, but he did the reading. And then he went back to school and we didn't talk about it again. So I can't remember, 6 months later, he came to me, because I said to him, they don't believe this. I said to him, they don't believe this. They say they do, but they don't know anything about it whatsoever. Anyway, he was convinced that they did, and anyway, he did this. Anyway, he came to me about 6 months later. He said, Daddy, he said, you know what? He said, you never guess what happened today. I said, what happened today? He said, well, the teacher asked the class, who in the class knows Otche Nash, who knows the Lord's Prayer? And I said, and what happened? He said, I was the only one. Now, of course, this is anecdotal, but I'm trying to give you an insight into the reality of living here, rather than this caricature, cartoonish idea of Russia, which is not correct. Russia has, as I say, it has some good things about it, but most of the good things about it are things which are residual or vestigial, and they're being burnt out of the system by technique, as they're being burnt out, have already been burnt out of the system everywhere else. And it's nothing to do with America. America is just simply the first victim of this, because it's the most advanced, or at least it was, and it's collapsing as well as a function of technique. And there are other aspects to it too, but this is the one I want to concentrate on here. So my point is this, that the differences between the fair world order and the new world order are minimal. In fact, they're not even real. They're just a matter of degrees of application. And so the difference between them is not so great as the difference between Shia and Sunni Muslims, even though both claim to believe the Quran and be the true believers in the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad. They're not even as great as that. They're more like two factions within one strain of Catholicism. They accept all of the same postulates, and they apply them. It's just a slight difference in the way that they apply them. And therefore, if you believe the same dogma, if you apply the same doctrine, if you do the same thing, you're going to get the same thing. And going back to what this American said about, well, the reason why we do it is because we can, and if you could do it, you would do it too. Why is he wrong? If everything else is the same, and it is the same, Russians are no better intrinsically than Americans, or worse, and vice versa. No. People's actions are a function of what they believe. And this country is every bit as materialistic and beholden to and embracing of technique as anywhere else, insofar as it can. And obviously it's quote unquote advancing very fast, but is the outcome going to be any different? I would argue that unfortunately it won't be. And the reason is because all of the inputs are the same, so why would the outputs be any different? What I'm trying to do in this part of my presentation is to just give people a bit of a prod, because I'm rather sick of hearing all of this kind of Russia fanboy stuff. There's nothing special about Russia. Russia is unable to withstand technique, just like everywhere else. I'll give you another example. I've been twice to Chechnya, which is part of the Russian Federation. I like Chechnya very much. I like the Chechen people very much. I've got a lot of respect for the Chechen people. They have a problem in Chechnya, which is the same problem as everywhere else. Chechnya is a highly traditional culture and a very male culture, and that's why it survived, one of the reasons why it survived. Now, they have a problem in Chechnya, which is technique. So whilst they like the iPhones and the Mercedes-Benzes and all the rest of it, they're concerned for their young people who are being, they probably wouldn't be able to put it in exactly these terms, are being debased by technique. But the problem is you can't stop it. So whereas Chechen women tend to be very modest, not all, but very modest, generally speaking, and virtue signal within that convention, you see now that you see a lot of these, what do you call them, duck faces, frog faces, with these ghastly lips everywhere, because they're indoctrinated. They've got the iPhones. These girls are looking at the Kardashians, and if you talk to Chechen people, which I haven't done and enjoyed doing, and get them to sort of open up. I mean, obviously they have a caste system there. You've got more and less intelligent people there, but they understand that they are under attack, and yet there's nothing they can do about it. There is nothing they can do about it. Anyway, I'm going to stop that there for my sort of online presentation. The rest of this presentation is going to be on my Substack for my paid subscribers. I currently upload to Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube and Substack, so please like, share and subscribe on all platforms. It's free to do, but a valuable way of giving back. Go to samgerrans.com and drop your email in the box to subscribe to my Substack newsletter and get all new content delivered to your inbox. I back up my mailing list so that if big tech cancels me, we still have options. I work outside the mainstream and have no corporate sponsorship. If you value what I do, you can help keep the lights on at samgerrans.com/contribute, or upgrade to a paid subscription on my Substack to access my more detailed work as well as comment, Substack being where I read all feedback. I continue to make my legacy projects available free. Summaries and links are at samgerrans.com/books. Finally, I post news, thoughts and announcements to my Telegram channel at t.me/samgerrans. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.